Hello there guys and happy Halloween! Yes, it's that spooky time of year where everything scary is in season and where TV and theaters are filled to the brim with horror movies. But you know, there are a lot more great horror movies than what's on TV or in theaters right now. It's just that a lot of them don't really get the attention they deserve. And that's why I decided that this year I'm going to recommend a bunch of movies that I really like and that I think deserve another mention. Now, unlike my other lists, this isn't really a top 10 list per se. I didn't put the movies in any particular order. So it's really more of a straight up recommendation video. We're just going to be real chill and just do this straight. Like, there's not gonna be much of my usual silliness and jokes. That's right, no silliness in this one. No jokes. Just simple and to the point. There's going to be absolutely no scary skeletons and shivers down your spine. Okay, I'm kinda cheating. What we do in the shadows is technically way more of a comedy than a horror movie, but it's too goddamn good not to include here. Have you ever wondered what it's like to be a vampire? I mean, what it's really like? Jermaine Clement from Flight of the Conchords has, and his response to this hilarious movie. Here, a camera crew follows a commune of vampires living together in New Zealand around in an exclusive documentary look at their everyday lives. This movie is pretty much perfect. Not only are each of the vampires spot-on parodies of classic vampire archetypes, it's filled to the brim with that Conchords-esque awkwardness and finds Buster-gut comedy in asking just the right questions. Like, how do you get dressed for the club when you can't see yourself in the mirror? Do they get along with other monsters?
Look out, guys. Don't catch fleas.
What's that, mate?
Huh? Why don't you go smell your own crotches, huh?
Come on,
what are you talking about? We don't smell our own crotches, we smell each other's crotches, and it's a form of greeting.
You're on camera,
Yeah.
mate. Don't do
What?
it.
It's okay, because I know this guy. It's Count Fagula.
And how do you clean up the blood after feeding? As far as I'm concerned, what we do in the shadows, along with Tucker and Dale vs. Evil, is the best horror comedy made in at least the last 5 years. If you like vampires even a little bit, you need to go watch this one right now.
Vampires have had a pretty bad rap. We're not these mopey old creatures who live in castles. And well, most of us are, a lot are. But there are also those of us who like to flat together in really small countries like New Zealand.
Don't ever talk with your eyes. Be sure that you compromise. You're dead, you're dead, you're dead, you're dead.
Many people are familiar with Lloyd Kaufman, the man who created Troma Entertainment and brought us awesome films like The Toxic Avenger, Terra Firma, and Poltergeist Night of the Chicken Dead. But not nearly as many people are familiar with his brother, Charles Kaufman, who has admittedly only directed a handful of films, the most famous of these being Mother's Day from 1980. In this movie, a trio of young women go on their annual college reunion camping trip, but are kidnapped by a pair of crazy brothers, who apparently routinely kidnap and torture people to please their insane mother, as she believes her own deformed sister is hiding in the woods and is out to get her. Yeah, Mother's Day is a weird beast to say the very least. It's too legitimately brutal and nasty to be an amusing B-movie, but at the same time, it's a little too goofy to be a real spine chiller.
Yeah! Oh.
What it is, however, is a unique and violently brutal movie that feels just as demented as its title character, managing to be unsettling in just how off its rocker it is. And unlike many films of this kind, when these ladies fight back, they do so with equal levels of cruelty, and give us a hell of a showdown between heroes and villains. What's that? How brutal is it, you ask? Well, let's just say that Drain Cleaner is not for drinking and leave it at that. I haven't actually seen the remake, but I highly doubt I can catch the batshit insane charm of this one. If you're even half as sick of a bastard as I am, Mother's Day is definitely worth a watch. Oh, and apparently it was filmed right across the very same lake where Friday the 13th was being filmed at the very same time. Ain't that some shit? Speaking of sick bastards, The Loved Ones has some especially nasty examples. In this Australian movie, we follow Brent, a quite legit troubled teenager. He's lost his father and his mother is a total wreck because of it, but at least he has his girlfriend Holly and a school prom to look forward to. That is until he is kidnapped by Lola, a girl whose prom invitation he rejected, who then proceeds to make him the centerpiece of her own twisted, perfect private prom night. You know, now that I think about it, this movie is basically like a gender-flipped and way less funny version of another great underrated movie called Otis. Now that one is actually... Ow! Jeez, what the fuck was that? I'm not really a fan of the kidnap and torture genre in general myself, though I do see why so many people find it effective. It's definitely a scary thought. And in this particular scenario, the overdone prom decorations, Lola's insanity and her, less than savory fascination with her own father, along with the creative torture methods, really makes the whole thing extremely uncomfortable to watch.
You've got 10 seconds to go, or Daddy's gonna nail it to the chair. It's crying. I better kiss it better.
It doesn't help that it has some really darkly comedic tones as well, which only creates even more discomfort. I don't know what the point of this movie is. Is this meant to criticize the pressure for teenagers to have perfect school lives? Or is it literally just a high school version of Misery with no bigger point to it than that? I don't know for sure, and it doesn't really matter. It's very unpleasant, very tense, and a damn good horror movie that deserves to be watched more.
You've got to push harder.
We all know Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. It's largely regarded as not just one of the best horror movies ever made, but one of the best movies ever made, period. And while Hitchcock was already famous, it certainly shot him into superstardom. The concept of a sympathetic, relatable serial killer with a genuine mental illness was still so new to audiences at the time that it made the film super unique, and all serial killer movies after it have been influenced by it in one way or another. But not nearly as many people know that a very similar movie was made at about the same time in England. This movie was Peeping Tom by Michael Powell, and told us the gruesome story of Mark Lewis, who murders women with a spiked tripod while filming their expressions of fear so he can use them in his own little documentary. Thanks to the method of murder, this movie manages to make a hell of a statement about the voyeuristic nature of horror films, long before Michael Haneke started beating audiences over the head with it in funny games. Much like Norman Bates, Mark Lewis is a truly mentally ill man combating the madness that has grown inside him due to horrific treatment from a parent. But unlike with Psycho, British audiences were not ready to feel sympathy for the killer. The film was heavily censored before even being released, and when it did see a release, it was more or less universally panned by critics and audiences alike, effectively ruining Powell's filmmaking career. Thankfully, it has since been much better received and is now regarded as a classic. It's just not widely known by the public, and it really should be, because this is a great, tense and tragic horror piece. Okay, I'll say it right away. Re-Animator is fucking awesome. There's no denying that. I mean, hell, I've got the poster right there. But can any of you guys actually name me any other Stuart Gordon horror films? Other than From Beyond? Yeah, that's what I thought. Gordon has made a fair few movies of all sorts, but he's definitely most known as a horror director. Yet not a lot of people know that many of his other fine horror movies. And my favorite among these is Castle Freak, which no one ever seems to talk about. Like many of Gordon's films, it's very loosely based on a H.P. Lovecraft story, and it stars Jeffrey Combs. Here, Combs plays a family man who has inherited a castle in Italy and moves there with his wife and his daughter, who was blinded in a car crash. What they don't know is that in the cellar, the deformed son of the former owner of the castle, has been chained up and tortured his entire life. But now he breaks free and starts to cause havoc as he prowls around the castle. This movie is definitely a grim one, and stylistically speaking, it oozes of classic gothic horror imagery that really serves its mood well when coupled with a balls-to-the-wall modern gore. But the real draw of the movie for me is the nature of the titular castle freak. He's basically a physical stand-in for the character's own repressed rage, resentment, and other issues they have to face, making him much scarier than he already is. Sure, Castle Freak may not be the most unique horror film out there, or even one of the best, but it's one of my favorites from Stuart Gordon, and it's a really atmospheric piece that delivers on violence and thrills. And I love it. Oh boy, Dean Koontz. A lot of people kind of consider him a dime store version of Stephen King, and from the few books of his I've read, I find myself agreeing. He's written a ton of books, many of which have had film adaptations, and he has fine enough ideas, but I think his stories just tend to get oversimplified and repetitive. Except Phantoms. Phantoms is fucking awesome, and we're totally gonna talk about it some other time. Odd Thomas, however, is something special. I haven't read any of the books this movie is based on, but if it's even a little like the movie, it may well be Koontz's best work, period. Thomas Odd is a simple guy. He has a cute girlfriend, he works at the pancake place, and he likes his simple little small town life. He also sees the ghosts of the recently violently departed, and makes it his mission to beat the ever-living crap out of whoever is responsible for it on a regular basis. But when he starts to see an influx of spirits he calls Bodaks that only arrive when something horrible is about to happen, he starts to unravel a truly gruesome event that's gonna hit his peaceful town. Not on his watch. This movie is great. No ifs, ands, or buts. Odd is a fun character. His banter with the people in his life is funny and incredibly endearing, and the action scenes are done with such a great fluid style and with such insane determination from Odd that it's impossible not to get pumped up when he starts chasing killers. As Odd himself puts it,
I may see dead people, but then by God I'd do something about it.
we all know the classic werewolf plot to death. Dude gets attacked by a wolf, starts to have sleepless nights where people die, we finally get a transformation sequence, and then all hell breaks loose. Or some people hole up and have to fight off werewolves similar to all other monster movies. It seems like there are really only two ways to tell a werewolf story, and it may be why there are so relatively few of them. So it's a good thing we've got movies like Laid Faces. In this one, an elderly blind war vet named Ambrose moves into a retirement community, less than happy about having to spend his last days there. Not long after he moves in, however, his neighbor is murdered in a vicious animal attack, and he is attacked as well soon after, but survives. Ambrose, however, is not fooled for a moment. Blind or not, he guesses right away that it's a werewolf attack. So knowing it'll be another month until the full moon, he begins to set up his defenses. This is where Laid Faces sets itself apart from other werewolf movies. At no point does the movie pretend to be able to fool you or its main character into thinking anything other than werewolves is at work, thus never wasting your time. Ambrose basically spends the bulk of the movie setting traps and acquiring weapons, and it works as a hugely rewarding build-up to a hell of a fight. So if you're looking for a slightly different werewolf movie, this is definitely one you should watch. This is a very recent addition to the list, by which I mean I've had this movie lying around for years and only saw it about 2 weeks before I started writing this list. Now I wish I could go back in time and watch it way sooner, because this thing is great. In Triangle, a young single mother takes a day off from looking after her autistic child to go sailing with a few acquaintances. However, a freak storm hits and capsizes their boat, and the lot of them end up on an abandoned cruise ship. Soon enough, however, they find themselves attacked by a rifle-wielding person with a bag on his head. And then things start to get weird. This is already a fantastic setup to a horror movie, or potentially a slasher movie. I mean, one of the cores of horror is isolation, and how much more isolated can you get than in the middle of the ocean? But it doesn't take long for Triangle to go in a completely different mind-bending direction that I wouldn't dare to spoil for you. It will have you scratching your head upon a first viewing, piecing things together upon a second, and realizing that you can still interpret it in new ways on a third viewing. This one's a must if you've been looking for something a fair bit different than the common fare. Highly recommended. We tend to put Stephen King-based movies in two groups: the Academy Award-winning masterpieces and the piles of utter steaming garbage. But naturally, that's not the whole truth. There's tons of other King-based movies in the middle of that, many of them pretty damn good. And among them, my favorite, and my favorite King story in general, is Cujo. It's kind of funny. For a writer who has such an idea overload that his books can sometimes feel muddled and lacking focus, the one book he wrote in a complete alcoholic and drug-addled frenzy, and that he admits to not even remembering writing, is one of his simplest and most on-point stories of all. In this one, a woman and her young son end up trapped in their car during a heat wave while a vicious rabid St. Bernard is roaming free outside, just waiting for an opportunity to attack. It's basically a story that is boiled down to one of the base concepts of horror. There's something that wants to hurt you, and you can't get away from it. Watching such a big, friendly, huggable dog gradually turn into a snarling, pus-oozing monster is truly horrifying, and is pulled off almost flawlessly in the movie. With just a few simple camera tricks, clever usage of real dogs and props, and sheer suspense, this movie really ramps up the scares. Now, it's not a perfect movie by any means. Technological advances mean that this situation is even more unlikely than before, and it takes a little while to get to the good part. But once it gets there, it never leaves, and you'll think twice before petting the big friendly neighbor dog after watching this. Sometimes less really is more, and with such an ingenious concept, Cujo seats itself firmly in my list of favorites, and it's not going anywhere anytime soon. Talk about the little movie that could. You know how horror film villains often have tragic backstories? Whether they drowned and watched their mother die, got horrifically disfigured as the result of a prank, or were mistreated from birth, many of the greatest film monsters got their start from a sad origin. Well, prepare to meet one of the saddest in this 1981 TV cult classic, Dark Night of the Scarecrow. Here we meet Bubba, a mentally challenged adult whose best friend is a young girl. When said young girl is attacked by a vicious dog, the creepy local mailman Otis blames Bubba for it and rallies some of his mates for a round of small-town vigilante justice. They chase Bubba to his home, where they find nothing but a scarecrow, from the looks of it. Oh no. Oh, Bubba. Oh no. After Bubba's name is cleared, the group claims self-defense and somehow manages to get away with it in court. For now. Because soon after, scarecrows start popping up on their properties and they begin to drop like flies. Being a made-for-TV movie, Dark Night of the Scarecrow is not one you watch for high levels of violence or intensity, but it uses its limitations to its advantage. Never showing us the killer, it doesn't make it clear until the very end whether or not there is actually a ghost involved, or if someone else is doing the murdering. But even with that, you got so many other great elements to watch. Like the creepily cheery little girl, the truly violent villainous Otis, played to perfection by Charles Durning, and the vast open farmlands that offer no escape from the oncoming vengeance. This movie was so well liked that it was a widely spread VHS rip for a while, and finally got a beautifully restored DVD release. Not a lot of old TV movies can say that. All that just goes to show how far a simple idea, a great ending, and some wonderful scares can actually get you. Oh, and it takes place on Halloween, thus making it the perfect movie to cap off this list. Alright guys, that should give you something to tide you over until the next Halloween. Now naturally, there are tons of other great underappreciated horror movies out there, and I'm sure we'll get to cover some of them in the future. Until then, why don't you tell me a couple movies you think are criminally underrated in the comments below? I'd love to read it. Still, Halloween is approaching, and do remember, try not to choke on your candy, remember to dress spooky for the season, and most of all, have fun.
Shrieking skull will shock your soul, seal your doom tonight.
Happy Halloween, boils and ghouls, and thanks so much for watching my video. I hope this gives you a couple good ideas for some spooky screenings. If you liked it, please like and leave a comment. And don't worry, there's plenty more videos on my channel, such as this one, and this one. And if you subscribe, you'll be the first to know about future videos. And if you really just can't get enough of me, you can also find me on Twitter, Facebook, and Twitch. I hope to see you next time, and until then, enjoy your spooky holiday.